Performance, reality checking on the process of design with the architects while using the Xerox machine. Centreless and directionless architecture, which uses spatial tactics through repetition. Content. This proposal of performance with the Xerox machine has 4 big chunks. First chunk is about where the idea of repetition comes from on the ground of theory. Second chunk is about how the phenomenon of repetition is related to architectural imagination. Third chunk is about how repetition is using the tools of abstraction and representation to check the reality. Fourth chunk is about the performance proposal. But firstly, I pose the question of how we can think of performative and centreless spaces, and finally, revealing the proposal of Xerox machine. Part 1. Specific field of interest and critical point, and repetition. What does repetition mean? Phenomenology is a philosophical study of the structures of experience and consciousness. In other words, how the world appears to us in subjective senses. Consciousness has 4 elements: perception, memory, retention, and pretension. And finally, signification. Here, I'm going to match retention and pretension to repetition. Let's define repetition a little bit. Michael Hayes says, repetition makes us remember and then makes us check our memory. When we question reality and the crisis of real, which is the reason that triggers to think about repetition, we depend on our memory. Through repetition, I aim to cure the crisis of real. Repetition is a performance that takes place in time, so it's time dependent. The desire of repetition is placelessness, no centers, being dependent on time. So repetition is rebel, repetition is about resistance. With 4 notions, it is time dependent, centerless, placeless, and it is about the other. Repetition, when it's performative, includes no clear direction, no marked sight. It doesn't tell you where to go, it doesn't tell you how to stabilize or fix the image. It's the undoing of monumentality, and it's certainly not stable like copies. Repetition, when it's spatial, has to be performed in space. The memory and its check has to be experienced in time. When it's an architectural space, in order to check, we need to be performative. The architecture has to be performed, it has to be marched, it has to be slept, it has to be experienced with body. Hayes says, it is not a fixed history, but a way of remembering a living memory. A way not to forget, to keep the mental flows, the energies, thoughts active. Issues with real are also issues with memory. Issues with space are also issues with the lack of performance. Big chunk 2, aka part 2, from phenomenons of repetition to architectural imagination and repetition. Here I pose the question of how we materialize a phenomenon. We can answer this question by matching 2 theoreticons, Michel Desartaux and Michael Hayes. Both of these ideas underline the 4 elements. So what is tactics, if it includes similar elements to repetition? Tactics are coming from the ordinary. It's about everyday life. It's the habits, the acts, the behaviors, the way we produce. So it's quite the repetitive things in life. But here's the twist. Tactics give the escape from the disciplined society. It gives the free points that are invisible on map. Hayes likes to give the 2 examples of mise and Eisenman. From the spaces of everyday life, a passage of mise with the repeated elements used, he says, mise found a non-hierarchical and centerless architecture. It goes the same for Eisenman. While using the ordinary, he made a mass of the same repeated elements. But it isn't about the stable experience of looking at the space. It's about walking in the space and realizing that it is actually a chaos. Like I said earlier, it doesn't tell you where to go, it doesn't tell you how to stabilize or fix the image. And maybe this is the way repetition makes you remember and then check your memory, then check the reality. Let's talk about the relation of repetition and architectural imagination as well. As we walk through it, we start to construct in our minds the interaction of the conceptuality and structurality. So we move from phenomenon and experience to structure and the imagination, to the idea that the concept of this project and the organization of this project can only take place, can only be known in the architectural imagination as a kind of summing up and gathering together of the spatial information that we receive in our experience of the building. Chunk number 3, aka Part 3, Abstraction, Representation and Repetition. When we mark something, we represent it at the same time. Repetition is dependent on time, but not to places or marks. In that way, repetition uses abstraction and refuses representations. When there is no marks, there is no fixing as well. There's no certainty in performative repetition. Certainty would make it over and done with it, in that way forgettable. But unrepresentationality, which comes through abstraction, exceeds its temporality. So in refusing inscription, in refusing to try to represent, repetition forced us to continue to remember, to refuse to forget, to keep checking reality. Abstraction to produce the critical memory. Though it cannot be represented, it must be repeated, remembered, and checked. Finally, Part 4, Project Brief and Performance of Architects. Here I will first disagree with the theory I represented earlier, the one about the tactical space. Theoretically, it's still dependent on those theories, but it is another approach to realize it. So instead, I will propose to use a Xerox machine, using repetition and mass production in the process of design. The steps will be like this: choosing a problematical area, handling and designing the area from up, imitating the controlling eye urban planning approach, making quick decisions, copying and printing every idea, making as many and as off the wall as possible, checking the reality of design process by fast collage city makings. Our tool is the Xerox machine. Our clients is the architects. Our desired qualities are as many copy as possible. Our output is checking the very source of design process which create our everyday spaces. If you want to repeat this video, click replay.